Hey everyone, today we are back here at the bookshelves, and I thought for an interesting topic we'd be talking about assigned reading. Now, assigned reading, it's something we all go through, so I thought, it might as well be a topic that, people will take interest in. These are going to be the books that I thought were most impactful from my time in high school and college. And that's not to say that these are not all, like, other books I didn't enjoy or I didn't get something out of them. These are the books that I enjoyed so much that they are on my shelf still to this day, or I've gotten my own copy after having the school provide one or whatever it might be, or I had maybe I had one at one time and then I wanted an upgraded version, something like that. So I thought I might as well talk a little bit about my experiences, like what kind of classes I take in school, because it does depend. I think that it has a big impact on people. What kind of programs you were into, especially when it comes to college and all that, extracurriculars you took, all that kind of stuff, and also what kind of student I was, and also maybe the importance or the value in assigned reading. Because I'm not going to say I overtly or no overbearingly enjoyed a lot of assigned reading. Honestly, most of the books I had for assigned reading for school, probably like most of you, did not enjoy. Or at least like they were fine, and I didn't really come back to them. So, yeah, let's start out. What kind of student was I? So I took high school English class as you're supposed to. And that was primarily, I would say, after freshman year, I was doing honors or AP for all those classes. So that does make an impact on what kind of assigned books your curriculum has. Because I do know that, once I've talked to friends who went to the same high school as me, if they did not take honors or AP English, you weren't getting the same books, which is a very strange part of our academic educational system. I don't know if it's necessarily fair, that the students who are going to excel or the ones who at least want to learn are being exposed to different ideas, whereas the ones who are, they have no interest in it or whatever it might be, or just English wasn't for them or learning in school wasn't the right way. They were given different books and, so they come out with a different experience. So, you can't have the same experience. I think everyone, there's a rough variety, at least in the United States, of what kind of books you read for high school. I think everyone has like To Kill a Mockingbird, some sort of other Lord of the Flies, stuff like that. Those are fine. Those are not going to make my list today. So there's books like that, or The Great Gatsby. Boy, that's one. That is not a book I enjoy. That's not going to be on this list today. I personally found when I read that in high school, and I've had no desire to return to it. It's just a bunch of rich people problems. From the 1920s. It's a bunch of flashy, roaring 20s stuff. If you really are interested in that era, read the USA Trilogy by John Dos Passos. Now, I wouldn't assign this to a high schooler, but that is the same time period. And it talks about all the flashy, roaring 20s stuff, but it also has a lot more literary value to it. It's way more experimental. It's like the American Ulysses in a sense. I would say that's my great American novel right there. And it's 3 books, so maybe I'm cheating. Beyond just all the rich people stuff that goes on in that book, it also has, the other half, how the other half lives, and sometimes how poor people become rich and rich people become poor, which that's the real American story. And I find that Great Gatsby is a great book for teaching literary devices. It's great for that. So I understand why it's taught in schools, but it is highly overrated in my opinion. So you may have your own opinions. That's perfectly fine. So let's get. I'm already getting way off track. Let's see. Well, school wise, so yeah, I was taking a lot of AP classes, and so I don't know exactly what to compare that to because I didn't take the regular classes. I only have my experiences like talking to people and they tell me either like, oh, I read that or I didn't read that or I was never even exposed to that, whatever it might be. I should also say, too, while I was in AP classes, and I did pretty well doing the assigned reading in high school, I would say, or at least like being able to follow along, I was not someone who enjoyed reading for school. I enjoyed reading growing up, as I'm sure many people watching this, into reading now. You probably had an enjoyment in reading as a kid. Maybe you had enjoyment in reading in high school. I did not. And I know a lot of people who also did not, and now they've gotten way more into reading. I didn't really get back into reading until after I was done with school. Like it was really only assigned reading, and then maybe I'd read one book a year, maybe in the summer. And it's pretty typical because when you're a kid in school or you're a young adult in college, whatever, you're too busy to be doing that stuff. So if you like actually read as a pastime, as a hobby, as a student, all for you. But so a lot of people, we got a lot more other stuff going on. So yeah, I was not taking a lot of the assigned reading very seriously, to say the least. And so, take this with a grain of salt. These are the books, like I said, they're not necessarily that I didn't enjoy other books. It's that these are the ones that are still on my shelf to this day that maybe I've reread or I still want to reread. They've left a lasting impact, and maybe they've influenced my my ability to read currently. So let's start out with one of the first ones. I alphabetize these, and I never remember where they're at. Okay, so this is a big one. Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. Now, what I've found, and I'll put this back up here, what I've found about this kind of book is you either are assigned Brave New World or you're assigned 1984. I was not assigned 1984 and never read it. I probably should. But Brave New World is, in my opinion, the far superior one. When I think of the impact and the influence and how our world is today, it's Brave New World right there. There are ties, and I know the story of Brave New World, or of 1984. And, there are definitely like components to that where that is a valuable story, and that can be related to our current world. But I currently find that the Brave New World, every day it becomes more braver and newer, and actually it gets old because of how much this has been going on for almost a century. So Brave New World, if you are not familiar, I'm sure you're going to be familiar with this one because it's probably the most popular of all the ones I'm going to talk about. Is a book from the 1930s by a British man, Aldous Huxley. And it's interesting because, I read this my senior year of high school, I want to say. So actually, I'm not starting with the beginning. This was a second semester, so it was like one of the first books we read, like in January, February of that semester, for like introduction. Over that winter break, though, I read another Aldous Huxley book, not knowing that we were going to read Brave New World, and that was the Doors of Perception. Now this right here, boy, this is a highly impactful book. If I do a list of most impactful books on my life, Doors of Perception. I don't like this cover though, to be honest. Like this is just the copy I had. I want to get and it's not even the one I initially read. The initial one I read it's got a very spirally cover. It's very nice. When you go to bookstores, you usually see that one. You don't see this Art Deco looking one. This does not signify the fun and excitement of Doors of Perception. But Doors of Perception, this is nonfiction as opposed to the fiction of Brave New World. And Brave New World, the most popular book he did that about 20 years prior to Doors of Perception over here. Both of them about substances, about, the impact of drugs on the mind. Like this is about his experiences with mescaline in the 1950s, which was the psychedelic drug of choice at the time because, LSD-25 had only just become a thing, and it was not culturally accepted. Well, not accepted, but culturally available in the same way it would be in a decade after writing this. And mescaline being peyote, it was a lot more available. It was less controlled. The government wasn't cracking down on that in the same way as it is now. And so it's a lot of really great psychonautics. Like it really got me into psychonautics. If you looked at some of my other books, got a lot of psychonautics books. So I read that in the winter break before reading Brave New World over here. And boy, it was a fun time, because this is like AP English, and they always have you do your little discussions where it's like, you're going to come together and you're going to read. And you're like, what comments do you have as a teenager about a book? Because you have no life experience. I never had anything to share in these classes, mainly because I was not a very talkative guy. Hard to tell now, right? Brave New World over here. Having read something by Aldous Huxley already, it was great to have that as a reference point because, there's a drug in the Brave New World called soma, and that is the drug that pacifies the masses and that kind of stuff. So I was able to reference Doors of Perception. It was very interesting. I don't know why they let a high schooler talk like that. They probably didn't like that I was doing that, but that's a symbolism for where I went the rest of my life. As you can tell by looking at me wearing a pizza hockey jersey. Brave New World. I don't know what else much more to say. It's very influential on, I've read this, reread this, I should say, more than any other book. I think I've reread this 3 times now. There was a point where I was reading it like every other year or so. And then now I'm like, it's been about 4 years since then, and I was like, I got to take a break. I will say that for as much as this, like for the ideas, this is not a great story. Like the story aspect of it is where it's a weak one. I think I rated this 4 out of 5 stars for that reason. Like it's not, as much as I love Brave New World and how influential it is. Another book over here that follows up that is is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neal Postman. He essentially takes Brave New World ideas and he translates them into the more modern 1980s. And this is nonfiction. It essentially talks about how everything has to be entertainment now. Politics is entertainment, religion is entertainment, education is entertainment, and how that pacifies the masses in the same way. So I highly recommend that. And that cover, that cover is so good. It's during the golden age of television too, or that's a term. When television was the medium of choice, I should say. And so he's really talking about that, but you can compare it nowadays to social media, stuff like that. It is still highly recommended. That's a great book. But anything that is influenced by Brave New World and takes that ideology of it, I usually enjoy and I find a lot of value in. So I really appreciate that I read this in school and it stuck with me so much. So yeah, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Next up, another high school pick was, I don't have exactly a copy of it, but I've got here the basic Kafka. I bet you could guess which one it is. It is Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis being a short story about 50 pages, and it came out in, I think, 1915 or something like that. Like, actually, during his life, unlike some of his other unfinished works, like The Trial and whatnot. And people have talked ad nauseum about as Kafka and Metamorphosis, all that stuff. I read this, I think, sophomore year of high school, and it was a great introduction to just this darker world, this more realistic world, this more social commentary world, like how books can really comment on the world that we live in, and how relevant that was still too, because it was almost a century later, whatever, when I read this, or honestly probably a century. It was, it got me really into Kafka. I read this, I eventually got this copy of the basic Kafka, which is a collection of his short stories. It starts with Metamorphosis, and then it goes through Hunger Artist, all the big ones, all the big heavy hitters. And I read that, and there are some stories I like more than Metamorphosis, I'd say. Like Hunger Artist definitely is one of his best, and I think a lot of people have talked about that. If you have not read that, if you haven't read Kafka's short stories, I do recommend. Yeah, it's he's unlike anyone else. There's so many authors who are influenced by Kafka, and there will continue to be authors who are influenced by Kafka, because it's a scary world that only feels more and more relevant to the world of Franz Kafka. Like if he was alive today trying to figure out health insurance, boy, or the DMV, I don't know, just any of that shit. Like you'd be blown. Like he would have. I don't know. I don't even know what else to say about that. He would not be prepared for our brave new world of today. So I don't really want to say too much more. Kafka's a pretty obvious pick. It got me into reading The Trial, which is an amazing book. These I found at a thrift store. This, and I have a copy here of The Castle, which I have yet to read because this is a thick one. These aren't really the greatest additions to. I found them at a thrift store. They smell like cigarettes, which I feel like is the ultimate Kafka experience. I don't know if they still do, because it's been years. But they smelled so much like cigarettes, like they were in some smoker's living room. And usually you might say that's a problem, but it fits well with the Kafka experience. All right, so that's it for high school. This is not like I said, I was not thrilled by a lot of books. It's not to say that I didn't like them. I guess I could bring up as a side, like an honorable mention. We got here Farewell to Arms. Now, this is not my favorite Hemingway. I haven't read a lot of Hemingway recently. And this copy was not what I read in high school. Like I found this at a thrift store and I thought it was a cool version of it. I want to reread this, but I also want to reread all of the other Hemingways. And I've read a handful of them. Most of them are kind of underwhelming. He's a little overrated to a degree, but also he's got some good ones. Old Man and the Sea, great book. I'm sure that's a high school reading one for some people, but I read that on my own. Yeah, a lot of the other ones, it depends. Some of them don't really age very well, and some of them are just bad stories. Because he had a lot of output, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, like a lot of authors. All right, so that was high school. Like I said, it was a mix of a lot of stuff. It did introduce me to a lot of different genres and the time periods. Now, I'm a big fan of the Harlem Renaissance era. I don't have a copy of Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I haven't reread that since high school, so I don't know actually if it's a one I would really go back to. But it was my introduction to the Harlem Renaissance era, and I think that is one of the best eras of American literature. Just because of social commentary, it's a lot of big ideas, a lot of experimentation. That whole like 20s to 30s in general is a great period, but the Harlem Renaissance really is like a great component to that. So let's get to college. Right here we got Kaffir Boy by Mark Mathabane. Now, this is... I hadn't looked at this book in a while. I forgot what the cover was. As you can see, there's a bookmark in it. I actually tried to reread this. Why did I read this? Why was this signed reading for school? So I should say right now, I was not an English major. I probably would have not done well because I didn't like assigned reading. A business administration guy. Your worst nightmare, all you book people. So what class was this for? This was for an African literature and history course that I took as a elective and as one of my history choices. Now I'm a big fan of history. I wanted to take the varieties of stuff. I felt like you get a wide variety of history in your schooling, mostly around European and American history. Maybe you get like a few little mentions of when communism hit countries and when the U.S. invaded them. But you don't really hear anything about Africa. Like one of the first I think the first week of class was you had to be able to fill out a map and name where all the countries of Africa are, which is someone who did quite well in their 7th grade geography bee. Quite enjoyed that. This book, there was a lot of books in that class. Like Things Fall Apart was in that class. A couple other ones that I don't remember. This was peak era of me not caring about school either, at least for assigned reading. I did actually quite well in my semester GPA, but was not good at the assigned reading. And at the college level, they can tell, or at least like they were testing us. Like it was like every week, here's like a multiple choice quiz, and I was like, man, I gotta start reading these books. So we got Kaffir Boy over here, which is a memoir of a man growing up in apartheid South Africa, and it goes from his boyhood age where he's living in the absolute slums of Johannesburg. Like it is terrible conditions. Like it really is like something eye-opening for someone who was not alive then, who did not live in that world, and is grateful to not live in that world. And he goes through the slowly. He does amazing in school. Unlike guy over here, it says a lot about our society, I guess. He goes through school and actually is like miraculously doing well, and he's been lucky enough that like family members are helping him buy school books, whatever it might be. Like just by sheer chance, he really breaks through that, and he goes from the absolute poorest conditions to like maybe he gets to go to a better school, and eventually he gets accepted to, or they put him on the tennis team or something like that, which is a very strange thing because tennis was seen, and still to this day is seen as more of a upper class white sport, and he excels in tennis, and that helps him get a scholarship to go to America, and that's where the book ends. Is essentially, not to spoil it or anything like that, but it is the whole journey. You should enjoy reading that. I really highly recommend this. Now, since then, I've read many books by black men who it's their story of like going from the absolute poorest. You talk about like Richard Wright's Black Boy. I don't have a copy over here anymore. Or Invisible Man, or all these other ones. That is a genre of books. Now, at the time, I had not read anything like that, and it was really eye-opening. But I would say that I don't necessarily like search for like. There's something to be said about the suffering of black people used as entertainment, or not necessarily entertainment, but like. As some sort of emotional connection for white readers and just people in general, and how that isn't like a great representation. That's not the only representation, I should say. Now, I think something like this is quite valuable even to this day. I need to reread it. As you can tell, there's a bookmark in it. I got about 150 pages, something like that, 124 pages back into it about 5 or 6 years ago, and I read this about a decade ago, so that's why it's a little hazy. And I don't know how it holds up, if I really still feel as impacted as I did then. But I felt like, if you haven't read a story like that, and especially one from South Africa, like I'm sure you've read American stories and stuff like that are a little similar, where it's just kind of like these like against all odds memoirs. This came out in the 80s, I think. And I remember I was telling my dad when I was reading it at the time, he's like, oh, I remember I have a copy of that. I read it back in the day when it came out. Your grandmother, who she had passed away before I was born, had read it, so it was like a kind of an emotional connection of that as well. So that kind of stands with me. So Kaffir Boy, highly recommend. In terms of if you're looking for those kinds of memoirs, if you're looking for stuff learning about apartheid South Africa, all that kind of stuff. It really stuck with me, and I was able to pass the class. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about, it's another interesting one, is Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. Why did I read this? And what class is asking you to read some cyberpunk sci-fi? This was for a product development course. So, I majored in product development. Why did we read this? If you know anything about the history of Snow Crash and its cultural relevance, you know that it is actually assigned reading for a lot of companies. It is assigned reading for like Google and Apple, like all these kind of like tech companies, because it's so forward thinking. I'm sure Meta, Facebook, I'm not fucking calling it. I ain't calling it that. It's all assigned reading. Now, why is that? It's because, well, this is the book that coined the term metaverse, which is so popular now. It also is like one of it's a book from 1992, and it predicts a lot of our online spaces that we currently have, and even like a couple years after this book came out, already had. If you think about MMORPG kind of spaces, think of World of Warcraft, you think of RuneScape, you think of Second Life, all these games, and even to this day, like even the most mundane thing, like any of these, like VR chat is actually a good one. I'm not going to say it's a mundane example. That's actually probably the closest example to a Snow Crash you're going to get. But like anything from a mobile game with a community aspect to something like a VR chat, to what the Zuck is trying to accomplish with his metaverse. Best of luck, buddy. It was highly recommended for a lot of students. This class, I should say. So this was a product development course. It included not only business majors, but also included engineers and designers, like graphic design and industrial design students. So it was a whole mix of stuff, and it was kind of just this was summer reading assigned before the class started, and this was a year-long class, and it really I kind of still fail to understand how this fit in with the class, aside from the fact of like the history of or the cultural impact, I should say, of Snow Crash. It's a kind of a parody on cyberpunk, which if you hadn't read any cyberpunk like I hadn't at the time, and I'm sure most people hadn't at the time, they don't really understand it's a parody. I mean, the protagonist name is Hero Protagonist. It's a little funny, it's a little goofy. Some people like it, some people don't like it. This is actually the book that got me back into sci-fi, and I think that's why I'm really recommending it, because or at least bringing it up as an impactful book for me, because I don't know, education-wise, I don't know if it's really that valuable. This was during the era, too, I should say. Me in schooling, in business school, and stuff like that. It was the era of move fast, break things, which is, I feel like I'm unlearning right now. I'm reading so many books, if you follow me on Goodreads and stuff like that. I read so many books now about our current techno world, or tech world, about how bad the tech bro mindset is, how destructive it is, how our whole world is really just falling apart because these guys are moving way too fast and they're breaking everything. They are not thinking about our futures. They're only thinking about profits. They are cutting things short. It's like, we're going to revolutionize the delivery industry by having, we're going to just have a guy apply on an app and he's going to use his own car and he's going to go deliver you McDonald's. How revolutionary is that? I don't know. There were already delivery drivers. Oh, we're going to revolutionize the vacation or temporary spaces for living industry. You can just stay in someone's house. It's actually not their house. It's actually their third house because they've just bought that to use as an Airbnb. It's not actually their house. So there's just empty properties all the time, or at least they're being temporarily used by people who are glorified landlords when hotels already existed. They're not really they're not doing that much revolutionizing. And in this class, we were, assigned an actual company who was the sponsor of it, and we had to do ideation. And it was really interesting. This was in the auto industry for me, but it was a litany of different businesses that would sponsor this. And so it was really interesting because you were thinking like 5-10 years in the future, and now we're at that point where you're actually seeing that technology come to life. But it really proved how hard it is to actually be unique and actually be revolutionary and actually have you need. I keep saying that's the problem. You run out of words after 2 words. Having being able to actually come up with your own idea that hasn't been done before, and be a success at it. And as college students, you can't do that. And that's what I learned. Even as a guy with a full-time job, you can't do that. That's not to discourage anyone from actually being an inventor or being a ideator. It's just that's a lot harder of a job. And you got to be a guy like Neal Stephenson creating a book that really revolutionizes the world. I do want to end this with bringing up what I think the importance of reading, assigned reading for school is. I don't think it's that these are the greatest books of all time. As you can tell, I read or was assigned dozens of books over my time in school, and I've only mentioned 4 of them. What these books are intended to do are to introduce you to different ideas and to teach literary themes, to show different perspectives, to show different time periods, different eras of writing and how writing has progressed and how ideas have progressed and all that kind of stuff. And so, they're not going to be the greatest books. They're probably not going to stick with you too long, but they are the building blocks for you understanding. And it's just, I don't think these books are, they're very important in a sense, but also there's a reason why there's dozens of them at any thrift store you go to. You're going to find those even Brave New World, you're going to find that everywhere. You're going to find Metamorphosis at the thrift store because it didn't connect with some people. And that's all right. You were exposed to that. Another book I read for school that I actually don't have a copy of that I want to reread is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I haven't read that since high school, and that is like the only 18th. I talked about it. All my last couple of videos have been Russian literature. I haven't really read that much of 19th century Russian literature. Like that's the one, and but it was a great introduction, and it opened my understanding and having a baseline understanding of what that actually entails. I think that is where the importance of this comes from. You should be, sampling different things. You shouldn't just be reading like, your whatever books you find entertaining at the time, because then you're going to get stagnated in your tastes of reading, and that's all you're going to see the world as. And that's the same thing with me. Like that's why I'm trying to read a mixture of everything. Someday I'll go through all the books on here, and you can see the variety in what I read. And even that is still not a huge variety of books. It's it's a nice variety, and it is a good representation of my interests and where I've come from and what I've learned. But is that the entire understanding of human intellect and what knowledge there is to offer in the world? No. So yeah, that's just how that goes. I hope you found this interesting, and I'm hoping to do some other interesting videos, or trying to. We'll see in the future. So have a good one. Bye.